Hi there, Simeon Goa here, SIMEONGOA.ca. I mentioned in my previous post and wanted to follow up on it pretty quickly here around timing and when's a good idea to start looking at branding as a thing and when is it not a good time to start looking at branding as a thing from my perspective, given that you only have so much time and resources. And I want to preface this that, I mean, there are some people who are going through this slowly, but so often a lot of us jump in at one point or another and kind of have to backtrack and then go forward. But I think these phases, these timed phases are important to keep in mind if you are thinking about getting branding for your business. And I will also qualify that some of this stuff won't relate depending on who it is you're trying to get in business with. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that part of it. Sometimes we have to brand sooner than we actually need to because we're working with a particular kind of ideal client or in a certain industry where you literally wouldn't get through the door if you didn't have it. And I totally understand that. But for most service providers online and even offline, and even into product development up to a certain extent, these phases will be useful for determining whether or not should I get branding right now, or this is what should I focus on or not. So the first phase is an experimentation phase. You literally don't know what works and you literally don't know who you're going to be doing it with, but you have some skills and maybe you're coming out of school, maybe you're coming from a job that you've been working on for a long time. You've built up a whole bunch of skills, and now and so those things can be considered experimentation, depending. So if you haven't gotten any skills, that is, if you're trying to figure out what those skills are, and you're not coming from school, you're not coming from a day job that was in line with kind of where you're going, then that experimentation phase is all about figuring that part out. What is the overlap between what I know and what I know really well and what I can do really well and what people out there in the world need. And you can experiment online. That's a wonderful way of doing it. You can also reach out to people not online or an email or phone and sort of work through what it is that people are looking for and going to the source rather than to your head as quickly as possible in order to test out or experiment with ideas that might work. And getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but the second, I just want to say that this experimentation and the next phase, the testing phase, these are all kind of scary. So it's obvious that sometimes people jump to branding because it's like, oh, I'm not ready yet, but I need to look ready. And if you absolutely will not get past testing and experimenting without having some kind of branding or whatever, then maybe that's something that you need. But I highly recommend not doing that because you will discover things down the road that will be able to root your branding in something that's much more meaningful than, oh, I just don't want people to know that I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing right now, you know? So the first phase is an experimentation phase. You're figuring out what it is that you know and can help people with, and what it is that people actually are looking for, and finding an overlap that works. The testing phase, again, you're still on your own. Now you've kind of narrowed things down a little bit more. You're trying to provide a framework, loosely termed loosely, something that is simple, something that's complete, and something that's desirable. You figured out a little bit of an overlap. You want to be able to help people get up and down, to use a metaphor, some foothills, some little hills, up and down all the way. It's complete. You're not leading them up a mountain and then leaving them there saying, okay, this is where I stop, this is where I get off, and then they have to find their way down from the mountain from there. So this is the testing phase. And again, you don't need to, most of the time, have any kind of refined brand or anything else here. I mean, you might be building up some name recognition, which will be useful down the road to attach a brand, visual, graphic, tonal, those kinds of pieces onto it afterwards if you are operating under your own name. But you don't need anything at this stage, the testing phase, for you to do it. Again, so long as you're okay with feeling a little bit, not completely 100% a business yet. And I think that's a much better place to be, again, for reasons I've already mentioned. Then you have a full service, or what I might call what I'm calling a service phase. And at this time, you're still on your own, and but you need to communicate, but you do need to communicate to a larger audience. And at the service phase, where you actually are looking out into the world and want to represent yourself, this is a good place to start thinking about it. Don't necessarily brand yourself into a very specific niche. Keep things open. Don't paint yourself into a corner too soon. But start thinking about it and start implementing maybe one or two elements. Typeface, maybe the name of the business, or a graphic of some kind, some kind of element that provides some consistency to the public, online and offline, to make it easier for you to produce the content that you're starting to produce, to tell people about what it is that you're doing. And finally, if you go beyond the individual phase, where you are now working with people, you've hired people, and you have a little team, you may not need a full brand package, depending on the kind of business and everything else, depending on what you need. Again, that needs to be diagnosed individually, business by business. There is no one road to success. But if you do have other people who are working with you and producing communications for you, then having some kind of way to make sure that between you and your team, there is consistency. And that consistency is that internal consistency between you and your team is what facilitates a reliable experience for your public. So to go through these again, and I call that the brand phase. That's where you're looking to get a brand that's going to represent you and a team of people, a number of people working and doing activities in order to facilitate a business. So just a quick overview, so we've got our experimentation phase. This can be done from scratch. This can be done, the experimentation phase often for some people is in school, practicums, that kind of thing. The experimentation phase, however, also can be at a day job, where it's like, oh, I've got 10, 20 years of experience at this day job. I'm going out on my own. You probably don't need too much experimenting, depending on who you are. I had a decade of experience, and I still needed to do some experimentation because I wasn't totally clear on where I wanted to go in my business. So experimentation phase, you don't need anything. Don't do a ton. Don't spend a ton of time on branding at this point. Same with the testing phase. So you've done some experimenting, you've figured out, okay, well, maybe here's where my skills are. They align over here with what people need. Now you've got a testing phase. You're testing that out, seeing how that works, kind of refining it a little bit. Again, you don't need a lot here, if anything, honestly. Depending, again, of course, on if you're trying to provide a service to government as a subcontractor, then maybe that's where you might need that kind of stuff. But honestly, that's not going to happen until you get to a service stage or to a product stage, where you actually have something that you want to communicate to the public about, in a broader fashion than just making testing and experimenting things, connections for the purposes of basically trying things out and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And then finally, the brand phase. So brand phase where you've got a lot of people and maybe you have a number of services, maybe you have a number of products, that kind of thing. So 4 stages: experimentation, testing, service or product phase where you have one thing that you're going on, right? And then finally the brand phase. So there's a lot before you actually need to really get into the branding piece. And what happens sometimes, this is the last thing I'll say about this, is that people who sell brand strategy often say, well, we'll be selling you some of these pieces to the puzzle. And if they're charging a lot, they should be solving that for you, basically. And if they're not solving that problem, then it's not worth it. So just keep that in mind, that if you are in the testing, the early testing, the early, when you need someone who will help you figure out where that overlap is, then I'd be very cautious about that, because I think it's really important for you to be connected with that piece. And the more somebody else is doing it, the more it might not be what you want. And then you're caught. Somebody is leading your business in a direction you don't want to go, is a possibility. Just some thoughts around that. So I hope that helped. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Have a good day.